How can something written in 1795 be prophetic of now? We're claiming this is an extraordinary text. You're saying you hadn't heard of it until yesterday. I'm saying I hadn't heard of it till 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago. How on earth has it got buried?
Yes.
Whereas the great contemporary English attack on the French Revolution, Edmund Burke's reflection on the revolutions in France, we instantly becomes a sensational work. What is the difference between the two? And I think that's the fundamental question. And I think it's called slow burn. If you look at why Edmund Burke's text acquires the notoriety that it did, first is the extravagance of the language in some sections of it. This is the one where the wonderful passage talking about the assault on the guards in the Queen's bedchamber when the mob bursts into Versailles, and he sees there the destruction of everything that's noble and its replacement. It's wonderful with calculators, with the arithmeticians, the economists. The glory is gone. Phrases that are picked up by Marx, like all the decent draperies of life are ripped. There's this marvelous language. And that, to begin with, of course, actually led to its being denounced. The Prince Regent famously says of it when he first meets, this is a man who becomes George IV, when he first meets Burke after it had been published, the Prince says, "Oh, such stuff, Mr. Burke." In other words, Shakespearean rhetoric. The reason that it suddenly changes is because Burke, in that, prophesies, a work written 1791, prophesies everything that happens. He prophesies the terror. He prophesies Napoleon, he prophesies war, he prophesies the loss of legitimacy, social dissolution. He comes up with the master argument that this is why does the French Revolution go so disastrously wrong? It's because it tries to invent the world from scratch. That rather than accepting that we inherit an enormous part of our behavior, it seeks to cut off. It seeks to be a clean break. And that, of course, was visibly the characteristic not only of the French Revolution, but of the Russian Revolution, and even more particularly the Chinese Revolution. So it offers a kind of archetype of analysis and resistance. Now, why haven't we recognized that Jeremy Bentham does exactly the same? And in other words, what you've got with Burke is talking about the whole pattern of the revolution, its politics, its military development, social development, and the entire mental atmosphere. Why hasn't Bentham acquired the same notoriety, fame? See, I think the answer is that precisely, although there were declarations of human rights, 3 or 4 of them in the period of France, they weren't put into serious effect. The first time you try to put these things, and you will correct me, I'm sure, on this, into serious effect, is following the post-war settlement in 1945, with, on the one hand, the European declaration that then becomes a convention. In other words, a declaration is a general statement. A convention is an international agreement by which states agree to be bound themselves. And the exact same process happening with the United Nations, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as the long debate as to translating it into the convention, which I don't think emerges until the early 1970s. But what also seems to me to be very curious is that although these things are produced with much pomp and circumstance, they don't really have very much direct legal impact until much later. And I think the reason that you and I are getting so excited about this is that the incorporation of the ECHR into English law between 1997 and 1998 is the moment at which this wholly alien, this again is something we need to explore. Why we've been talking about France so much is that what we did with the European Convention, although it may have been talked about by Churchill, although it was drafted by Lord Kilmuir, it is nevertheless a mode of lawmaking which is wholly alien to England. It's essentially French method of lawmaking, and its consequences only really become evident almost exactly 200 years after the French Revolution, and in 1998, when it's incorporated into a common law system where, of course, it's a bit like I would say it's a bit like putting a cancer in the body. People may reject that, but I think there's a very strong argument for seeing it like that. And you suddenly have this dramatic series of consequences, which over the following 20 years have gathered force and have become increasingly controversial. But coming back finally to your question and my answer to it, as far as I can see, and I think you agree, Bentham actually predicts pretty much everything that's happened. In other
Yeah,
words, it's this slow burn prediction,
yeah,
and I suppose if you put it much more simply, I've gone the long way around the houses. If you put it more simply, it is that events have caught up with Bentham. That if in other words, if those documents had been put seriously into practice in the 1790s, which they weren't, people then and people subsequently would have immediately realized the validity of Bentham's critique. But because they weren't put into practice, it's taken 200 years for us to realize quite how good Bentham was.